Welcome to Making the Grade, the podcast that explores what's driving the decline in graduation rates between funding rounds and what it really takes to scale a venture-backed software startup successfully with realistic options to exit. I'm Tom Glasson, CEO at Scalewise, and each week I'm going to be joined by founders, investors, and some of the best go-to-market leaders in the world to unpack the strategies, the missteps, and the mindset shifts that separate those who graduate from those who don't. Expect real talk, actionable go-to-market insights, and honest stories that will help you scale more wisely and thrive in an increasingly competitive market. Because there is a smarter way to scale, and we're here to uncover it. If you've ever wondered what really happened after a big exit, then this is the episode for you. The truth is, selling your business doesn't always lead to a life of beaches and books and endless leisure. For many founders, it's actually the starting gun for an even bigger and more ambitious journey. And today's guest knows this firsthand. I'm joined by Sean Williams, the founder and CEO of AutogenAI, the company using large language models to transform how organizations win competitive bids. And before AutogenAI, Sean co-founded Corndell Ltd, growing it from a standing start to a 60 million exit in just 3 years. In today's episode, Sean and I dig into both journeys and the lessons that every founder can apply to their business, no matter if they're at seed stage or already scaling globally. So if you've ever wondered how to decide when the time is right to sell, what post-exit life actually looks like, and why keeping control as a founder matters just as much as raising capital, then this is the episode for you. Sean, welcome to Making the Grade. I suppose let's kick off by giving listeners a bit of context. You've had a fascinating career as a leader within, looks like both large corporations, companies like G4S and Serco, but you're also an exited founder who's now building something really meaningful again. So maybe to start us off, can you just give us a whistle-stop tour of your career to date and maybe take us on the journey that brought you to where you are today?
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks very much for having me, Tom. So in my current job, I'm the founder and chief executive at AutogenAI. So we use artificial intelligence to help organizations that win work with words. So if you're writing proposals or bids, then we help you write those proposals and bids faster, more efficiently, but critically more effectively. We help you win more for per bid that you put in. So how did I get here? Well, nearly 30 years ago, I started my career as a proposal writer. I was actually a researcher in a proposal team and then was a proposal writer. So I brought a deep understanding of what that entailed and how you wrote winning words and how you won work for the company I was working for at the time. At the time, I was mainly writing proposals for the British government to deliver human services. So I started off as say, a researcher in a team, then a bid writer, and then a bid manager, and then a bid director, a corporate development director, and then a managing director, and then a group managing director. And I sort of worked my way up from proposal writing into more general business development and then into more general management. And as you said, I worked for some very, very big corporate doing that. And then early 2000, I get all the dates kind of confused at this sort of point, but I got very bored of the corporate world. I sort of realized that the more I got promoted, the more of a middle manager I became. It's quite a strange feeling. I sort of handing spreadsheets from one group of people to another group of people. And I was sort of like 3 promotions away from being a FTSE 100 chief executive, but I didn't really want to do it. And the sort of things you needed to do then, it became very small p political. You know, it was mainly because you were just handing spreadsheets one set of people to another set of people. I left the corporate world, not really knowing what I wanted to do. But actually the day after I left G4S, the phone rang and it was somebody offering me consulting work. And that sort of happened for 2 years. And I had a really good time doing consulting work. But the thing I didn't like about that was the sort of, you'd go in and you'd make this big impact over sort of 3 months and then you'd leave and you never sort of got to see anything through. You weren't working as a team. You know, you weren't really doing anything with any sort of long-term purpose. So then in 2016, I saw this opportunity through the UK government's introduction of the apprenticeship levy tax. And really, that was going to do 2 things. One is it was going to triple the size of the market from $1 billion to $3 billion. So, you know, a market tripling in size, like only governments can click their fingers and do that. That was a big opportunity. But more importantly than that, purchasing power was going to move from civil servants to HR directors in big corporates. And it was fairly clear to me that HR directors in big corporates bought things in a completely different way to civil servants. Like, so you need to have a completely different approach, completely different product, a completely different way of marketing that product. And I was on the board of a software company that sold into training providers. And the managing director of that company said to me, "Hey, Sean, who's going to win in this new world? Let's go through the list of 1,500 companies who are able to, on this approved training provider list, who are allowed to do this stuff. And let's see which of those 1,500 look like they're going to make the grade in the new world." And we went through the list of 1,500. And at the end of it, we had a list of 0 who thought we were going to make it in the new world. So we sort of looked at one another and went, maybe we should do something. Like, it's a £3 billion market and there's no one we think's any good in it going forward. So we did. So we set up Corndell training company, set that up in 2017, September 2017, sold it, September 2016. Got our first learners in May 2017, and then sold it in September 2020. Sold it for $60 million to a German private equity firm. I stayed on for another year and then I left and I retired. I retired for 3 weeks. I realized that retirement was very boring. And during those 3 weeks of retirement, I started learning about new technologies. And one of the new technologies I came across was large language models. And it's just like right place, right time. I'd seen actually large language. I tell this story and I've forgotten. I actually found an email the other day from 6 months previously where I was at Corndell. And I said to the sales director and the bid director, "I'm playing around with this thing called GPT-3. It looks really interesting." And I got no response to that email. But so I had seen it before, but obviously when I'd kind of left Corndell, I had more time on my hands. So I got to play with it properly. And I was blown away by the technology. You could see an obvious way of putting that back to my first career of proposal writing. So put a small team of people together, raised some money from some angel investors and started AutogenAI. You fast forward to today, we've got 400 customers on 4 continents. We've won £4 billion worth of work for customers. We've got 3 of the big 4 consultancies. Our customers are the biggest construction companies in the world, health companies, defense companies. We're helping people win work using our software.
No, that was so good, Sean. And we're definitely going to come on to AutogenAI and kind of what you're doing there and some of the lessons. But I'd love to just touch on a little bit your journey with Corndell, which obviously, in quite a short space of time, you created what seems to be a real category leader in actually quite a crowded and perhaps deemed to be a bit unsexy market as well. What did you have conviction from day one that you started it that you wanted to go on this very quick journey to exit? Or how long did it take you to realize, okay, well, we've got an opportunity to exit this thing?
So with, I was completely naive. I'd never done anything like entrepreneurial, really. My co-founder, Richard, was a serial entrepreneur. So bought some more of that kind of experience. So I didn't know what you did. I didn't know how to raise money. None of us really did. We were sort of making it up as we went along. And we just did things that seemed right to us and made sense to us. So we found out about this SEIS tax break scheme that I'd never heard of before that made it incredibly attractive for investors in the UK to invest in early stage startups. And one of the things about those tax breaks was they all came to fruition after 3 years. So we thought we'd say to investors, give us some money and then under these tax breaks. And then in 3 years' time, as soon as your tax breaks become realized, we'll sell the company and you'll get your return and you'll get all the benefits of the tax breaks. You have to hold the shares for 3 years. So that was really the thought. We just thought, as we wrote our business plan, because we'd never written a business plan before, we probably should have an exit strategy for the investors who came in. And we wanted to keep it simple. We said, look, give us £10,000. In 3 years' time, we'll give you £70,000 back. That was like a really simple kind of, that's just how we saw the world. And that's exactly what we did. So that was really the point there. And again, I wasn't, I had no level of personal wealth or, any of those sorts of things. So, the thought that, you could exit a business and then get a kind of nice big paycheck, that seemed like the end point. And of course, I said then once you've been retired for 3 weeks, you realize that's not a very good end point, right? You can have, but it's an enormously privileged position to find yourself in, but it's something interesting to find out.
Gosh, I hear that so often from people that have had an exit or experienced wealth that's given them the freedom and the flexibility and the less stress around money. Every high growth story has its kind of inflection points, those moments where everything shifts. Sometimes it's a key hire, maybe a product decision, or maybe even a client win that kind of changes that trajectory. What were some of the key inflection points in that journey that you went on with Corndell?
Yeah, you sort of forget them, and every now and again they sort of pop back into my head. So, right at the start of the journey, to deliver training under the apprenticeship levy tax, you need to be on something called the Register of Approved Training Providers. And at the time, the rules have become much stricter. But the rules at the time were you had to have 3 months of accounts, and we didn't have 3 months of accounts because we'd failed because we had only just started the company. So we failed our first application on the basis that we didn't have 3 months of accounts. And we'd started selling kind of trading to people. So, we were going live in May and we didn't have the accreditation in April. And, so we very quickly reapplied because, of course, by the time we reapplied, we did have 3 months accounts and got the accreditation. But, things like that were tough. September 2018, we became cash positive. We had 100 grand left in the bank account and a payroll of 150 grand. We put 90 learners on the program that month. In September, and if we hadn't put the learners on, if something had happened, then we'd have been in real trouble. We didn't have enough money to make payroll, So, those things I remember, like September 2018 will stay in my memory forever, right? Kind of because that was the inflection point to going to cash positive in the business.
What I love about what you've shared there so openly, Sean, is that, it wasn't just up and to the right. And these growth journeys are very rarely linear. And there's times that you're sailing really close to the wind and you're running out of cash and you're wondering whether the business is going to succeed or let alone make an exit. What advice would you give to kind of founders that are out there that are like looking at the wall like that? Maybe their runway is depleting. Maybe they are losing a bit of faith and they're certainly feeling it under a lot of pressure. Like, what enabled you to kind of get through those moments? And what advice would you give to founders that are in that position?
Probably a cliche, but keep going. Kind of. And I think increasingly we live in a world on LinkedIn, which is like the world on Instagram. It's full of filters. It's full of stories that, it's mainly people just shouting, what purports to be information, but is actually a thinly disguised advertisement, whatever it is that they're selling. So I think it's really easy to look at other people's lives of other people's companies and think, they must have it right. On the outside, it looks like you've got this efficient, wow, look at what they're doing. They've got this amazing kind of product, amazing team. It's all go. They've just got this, exponential growth graph that they get without having to do any hard work. They probably don't even turn up for work until about 11 a.m., do a couple of hours, like a couple of emails out, like a demo. And that's another kind of like 10 million in ARR. And of course, from the inside, it looks completely anarchic. There's no process. There's no systems. These people don't get on. This isn't working. Everything's being held together by sticky tape and heroes kind of. And I think I often think that's the nature of exponential growth, because whatever you did last month is half as good as you need to do this month, or last year is half as good as what you need to do this year. So you can't just, as soon as you've built a system and process which is good enough for your $10 million company, well, you're going to be a $20 million company next year and a $40 million company the year after. So the process is out of date almost as soon as you've got it in place. So I think don't think somebody else knows the answers. Don't think everybody else is doing it easy. And because you're stupid or unlucky or like you're doing it hard, everyone's doing it hard. Everyone's finding it difficult. Everybody's muddling through. And really the secret is just to keep going. Like, kind of that, there was, I like much less so at AutogenAI because I've done it at Corndell, but there were like 4 or 5 times at Corndell I thought there is no way this business can survive. Absolutely no way. Like the VOAP, when we failed to get on the original apprenticeship training provider list, kind of, that would be one of them, but there were half a dozen others. I just thought there's no way this business can survive. And then you get through it.
Just talking about the exit event, because that is often a dream milestone for many founders, but the reality of the process is that it can be a bit of a roller coaster, and post-exit life is maybe not what people quite expect. You sold Corndell to THI Holdings. Maybe just share a bit more about that experience and what it was like for you to reach that that significant milestone, I suppose, given all the challenges that you'd faced along the way?
Yeah, because it was always on the list and it was always the plan. I hadn't got a plan to run Corndell for 30 years. That wasn't my plan. My plan was, as I say, when we built the company, the plan was to build it and exit in, kind of once in 3 years later, when we raised the money in early 2017, the plan was then to exit in 2020, which is what we did. So that was the plan. So we went out to meet our commitment to our original investors. The start of 2020, we started going out to financial advisors. It was COVID, so it's an interesting time to be selling a company. We put together a prospectus, sent it out, met some PE houses, shortlisted them down to like 2 or 3. Actually, there was a trade sale, I think, on the table at the time as well. Shortlisted 2 or 3, basically went with the one who gave us the highest offer.
Nice. And it was probably a good time to be selling to a degree, but maybe waiting another 6 to 12 months, you could have got an even higher valuation. We're thinking back, do you feel like you sold it at the right time?
There's 2 ways of answering that question. One is, would I have got more money if I'd sold it 12 months later? And the answer is yes. But that's kind of always going to be the case in a growing business. Right? Unless you're screwing the business up, then you're always going to get more money 12 months later if you sell it 12 months later, because you've got a growing business. And you're cashing in the promises that got you the valuation in the first place. But as I say, for me, my life wasn't going to be regulated training. That wasn't like kind of my dream kind of company. I was very proud of what we did at Corndell. I'm still very proud of what Corndell continued to do. I have no financial relationship with it anymore, but I can still see so much of me in that business, and so many of the people I personally hired are still there. And it was always brilliant training, brilliant people, like brilliant coaches, and I'm 100% regulatory compliance, and I'm super proud that the business continues to do that without any input from me.
That's great. Well, let's talk a bit more about Autogen, and I suppose just how it's evolved from the initial idea, or maybe it hasn't evolved at all, but maybe give us a sense. I kind of get a sense of what it is, but tell us who it's for specifically, how it works, and then maybe where you're at on that scaling journey. Because I know you raised a lot of finance in quite a short space of time. I think there was something like 6 months between your Series A and B. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, kind of give us a bit more detail about Autogen.
It's quite a strange world if you haven't been in it. So let's say London Borough of Brent wants to clean the streets. So somebody's going to come and pick up your bin bags from outside your house. So that isn't probably going to be done by people who work for the council. That is going to be competitively tendered. So there'll be 5 or 6 companies, well, indeed anyone can start a company and compete for this. And they are going to compete to Brent Council to say, I'm going to pick up the bins. Now, you might think that Brent Council would just go for the lowest price, but of course they don't, because lowest price, you just get lowest price, lowest quality, the bins will have to be collected. So what they'll actually do is say, who are you going to employ? How much are you going to pay them? How will you train them? What will happen if the bin people don't turn up? Well, your bin people don't turn up on time? How are you going to deal with complaints from local residents? And all of those will be questions, and they'll put together a list of questions, and there might be 200 questions, and you might have to write 2,000 word answers to each of those 200 questions. So now you're Veolia and you're competing against Serco to go and pick up those bins in London. And by the way, that contract's worth $50 million, like £50 million a year, right? So it's quite a significant kind of contract. And you now have to, as the business, fill in that form. How are we going to recruit bin drivers? How are we going to train them? How are we going to recruit them? And some people in your organization know the answers to those questions, but those people are generally not massively good writers. They're operations managers who are used to recruiting, bin kind of drivers and bin collectors. They're not like, English literature majors, So you're probably employing some proposal writers. Those proposal writers don't know anything about bin collection, and now they've got to write 500,000 words on how you're going to do bin collection to hand in, and whoever writes the best 500,000 words is going to then will be awarded this £50 million contract. And if you think, I've just mentioned that for bin collection, that might be for building the next generation of fighter jet for the US government, right? That might be for building the stadia in Brisbane for the next Olympic Games. That might be, so building the toll booths for a new motorway, right? And operating them. So All of this then is being done by teams of writers. And if you look at the big companies operating like in this space, they maybe employ 300, 400 writers across the globe, just writing this stuff. So how do those writers go about it? Well, they have to read previous proposals the company's done. They Google some stuff. They talk to subject matter experts and they try and put all of this together. Now, that is a massive task for something like the next generation of fighter jet for the US government. That proposal process might take 2 years. You might have 50 people working on that team putting that proposal together. So our software essentially makes that whole process easier using not just large language models, other AI techniques and other more primitive natural language processing techniques. But I talk about the real understanding of large language models is that computers can now read and write. And if you think so much of that process of proposal writing is about reading technical manuals, like training for bin people manuals, like, kind of like, and then reading that information and then writing, repurposing that information to talk about how you're going to do it in this new context. And there's a lot then around collaboration, around getting other people's inputs, around review, around making sure it meets scoring criteria to make sure it's compliant, all of these sorts of things. We're a very specific tool to use artificial intelligence and direct it to solving that very specific problem, which is a problem many people don't know about, but it's a like $500 billion market. Like it's huge because like governments, any Western government, any kind of like, democratic government has to go through that process. It's a price of democracy. You can't just give the bin contract to your mates. You have to have an audit trail. You have to won't the government just use AI to pick the best supplier and supply with? No, like the point is to have an audit trail. The point is to show the taxpayer that you're using their money wisely. But about 70% of our use case is business to government. But about 30% is business to business. So if you're a big four consultancy and you want to do the audit for McDonald's across the globe, you're competing. Accenture competing, Deloitte competing, KPMG competing, CGI competing, and they're all, writing a proposal to McDonald's about how they're going to do the audit best.
Wow. And you've raised quite a bit of finance. Tell us a little bit more about that experience and how much you've raised.
The Corndell journey was, we raised about a couple of $1 million from 35 individual angel investors. Then we borrowed another £600,000, another $720,000 from a subset of that group. And then we got to profitability with that money. Kind of, it was a different scale of ambition. And I'd sort of planned exactly the same journey for AutogenAI. And then the Gen AI boom took off and companies were just phoning me up every single day. Sean, can we give you money? Sean, can we give you money? And I'd say, no. But I've been taught in negotiation, never say no. I've been taught say yes if. So I started saying, yeah, okay, you can give me money, but you have to give me $20 million on a $100 million valuation. And that usually got them off the phone, apart from Blossom Capital, who said yes. So at that point, it seemed churlish not to take the money. And so we took the money. I'd learned all sorts of lessons from the sale of Corndell about keeping control. So you can take as much money as you like, as long as you don't lose control. Kind of like that's the really key thing as an entrepreneur. And that would be my advice to anyone. Like, you need to separate out financial owning from the control owning. Ophelia from Blossom, who's fantastic, so smart, really supportive. She said, you should apply for this thing called the AI grant. I'd never heard of it. It's like $250,000. And I wasn't that interested. And we didn't need $250,000. We just raised $20 million. But as I say, someone has just given you $20 million. If nothing else, it's a matter of courtesy to then kind of do a small request. And of course, we make software that makes it really easy to apply for grants. We then won. We were the only European company to do so. And as part of that, they said, you need to come to San Francisco for the weekend. And again, I didn't really want to go. I'm trying to run a company. I want to hang out with a bunch of founders, who all say the same things. All in the same, kind of position. And they said, no, you've got to go. So, all right, so we're going to go. So Raj and I, my co-founder and I, flew over to San Francisco. And actually, I have to say, it was the best 2 days. They introduced us to Figma's founder, Midjourney's founder, Stripe's founder. And he went from this position. And when I talk about what it did was, I was trying to work out why have they put us in this room with all of these kind of billionaires who, all 28 and kind of and it was obviously they're incredibly impressive individuals and very impressive, very intelligent. But at the same time, they're incredibly impressive. They're incredibly normal. And I think the reason they did it was to put founders in that room with these founders who started, $1 billion unicorn companies and show these are your peers, actually. This isn't something impossible. And when we'd started Corndell, the plan was always to sell it to someone bigger. When we started also Gen AI, the plan was, we always knew like this was like technology was going to take over the world. Like the internet, pre the internet or pre the popularization of the internet, there is no Facebook, there is no Amazon, there is no Netflix, there is no Google. Those companies, right, with those are internet enabled and they use that technology to become the biggest companies in the world. It was always clear to me that the same thing would happen. There'd be another half dozen companies who would use large language models, become the half dozen biggest companies in the world. And of course, Facebook and Google take some place there as probably as well. And it was always my view that you'd make tons of money and like be an interesting business selling to one of them. What the AI grant taught us was that we shouldn't be selling to one of them. We should be one of them. We should be the people buying the other people. We should be the company. And and it took Silicon Valley, it took a West Coast mentality, an American mentality to go from that kind of British entrepreneur view. I'll make $10 million. Happy days. Actually, we are going to go and build an era defining company and the money doesn't matter. What matters is building this company, which is going to be then, kind of culturally relevant, which is going to be important. It's going to be interesting, which will give you that genuine, there is such a cliche that Steve Jobs like dent in the universe, but it's a good cliche. Yeah, kind of like we will be the people making the dent in that universe, not somebody else who buys us so I can buy myself a slightly faster car.
Wow. And it's fascinating that it took you to go to San Francisco to be inspired like that. Is that one of the reasons why you've moved over to the US? Is that to kind of enable you to think bigger, or is it just that you particularly like New York?
Yeah, well, a few things. Really, it was, again, enormously practical. So to spearhead our US sales efforts, again, it comes down to who understands the product, who understands the market. And you need to really understand product and market and then be able to move the levers in the organization to make sure your marketing is supporting. We hadn't realized culturally, like the Churchill line, the countries divided by a common language. The US is culturally different to the UK. And it seems really obvious now, but it didn't seem obvious at the time. And it was fine selling software to the Australians in British English. But if you, as we did if on your homepage, you've got stuff which is spelt wrong from, American eyes and spelt, it looks foreign, it looks alien. And that's fine in a lot of cultures because you're used to, you're used to having stuff from outside. Americans aren't, it's got to feel American first. It's got to feel like that. So, they're just really simple lessons that we learned. So I came here so I could understand those lessons better and then push them through the organization quicker. So we could basically turbocharge our American sales.
That's great. We could probably do a whole podcast episode just about US expansion. To be honest. I've seen it fail so many times, and I'm sure there's a ton of lessons from your experiences. And I love that you've based yourself over there to spearhead that effort. But I'd love to just shift on to the kind of future of go-to-market and AI, because you're a really interesting intersection between those two things. You're providing a tool to really bid teams, sales teams to win more customers, but you're kind of at that cutting edge of AI as well. And the playbook for go-to-market, I think, really has shifted dramatically over the past few years, especially with the rise of things like PLG and AI native tools and new buying behaviors. From your perspective, how has go-to-market evolved over the last few years? And what are some of the key lessons and learnings from your go-to-market efforts at Autogen?
Well, I think it's really important here, and again, I think people can miss, is this is dynamic. It's an arms race. Like, it's possible to find things that work, and then they'll work for 3 weeks, and then everyone will 3 months, and then everyone else will copy you, and it no longer will work. I'll go back to computers can read and write. A really good go-to-market motion is about understanding, like, your customer. A lot of that is about reading, kind of that segmentation. A lot of that is about reading, about messaging, about as personalized and tailored messaging as you can. A lot of that is about reading and writing. And then your ability to do that fast and at scale, where you're not trading too much quality for quantity, but you can keep both. And I think, early large language. Like if I'm actually almost ashamed to say it now because it's so like cheesy and cliched. So we launched our product, AutogenAI, in September 2022. Mid-October, ChatGPT came out, right? December 2022. Now, this is going to sound completely cheesy and stupid. You'd be like, you did what? That sounds so naff. But this is 6 weeks after ChatGPT has come out. Like, people are still like, this is still brand new. We sent out to like 300 biggest prospects a poem we had written using our software about a Christmas poem, which is all about them, which we called like Achievement Generation, which no one else was doing at the time from LinkedIn and other things. And we did 4 images of Christmas with their like logos that we'd created using like probably an early version of Midjourney, right? And like at the time, that was completely groundbreaking, right? Like people were like, wow. And we were showing off like Gen AI. Now, of course, you go, you've done what, right? You know, kind of like, but, and that's how quickly it's moved, right? In like, so when we're doing that, like 2.5 years, right? You know, kind of to go from something that looks completely cutting edge to something that looks so naff and old school. And, you know, you'd go like, who use these people? I think the principles don't change. I often, one of the things I like to do to new BDRs is show them my LinkedIn messages and show them my email. This is 300 messages I get a day from BDRs trying to sell me stuff. Right. Yeah, kind of right. That I get 300. This is how you don't just get part of the delete kind of piece. Right. You know, hey, Sean, how's your day going? Delete. Right. Sean, loved your delete. Yeah, that kind of right. So, you know, differentiation, like, it's the whole thing about integrity. You know, kind of, yeah, if you could fake that, you've got it made. You can't fake it, right? You know, it's do you genuinely look like you've researched me? Do you genuinely look like you care about my problem? Do you genuinely actually believe my solution is the solution to your problem? And then you've taken the time to really articulate to me why you think that's the case. So, you know, and then at all sales stages of the sales cycle, right from flash, right to bang, right? You know, kind of that's kind of the critical kind of piece. And AI can speed all of that up when it's used well. When AI is used badly, it just makes, instead of having 200 delete emails, I've now got 400 delete emails.
Gosh, you touched on so many great points there, Sean, which we could dig into, and I completely agree. I actually have now an autoresponder on my LinkedIn inbox that says, this is not a good way to contact me. I'm overwhelmed with spam from BDRs. Like, if you want to contact me, use WhatsApp or email, just for any people that are actually sending me a genuine message that I need to respond to, because I just can't keep up anymore. But maybe just thinking about kind of hiring for a moment, because hiring into go-to-market, you know, certainly go-to-market leaders has always been tricky. I think expectations are kind of shifting in terms of what we need from these people to lead these teams. You have a brilliant CRO, someone I know well, who I really love, Nat Johnson. But how do you believe hiring into these functions has changed, you know, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, based on what you've seen?
Nat's a great example. Like, you know, Nat was such a fantastic hire for us. And why? Because she's tenacious, she's completely committed. She understands SaaS backwards, but she doesn't understand SaaS backwards in a way that then is, I'm going to keep doing it like we've done it in the past. Do you know, the key thing that intelligent people do, and that's super intelligent, right? Intelligence is actually something we really look for. Also, Gen AI, I think it's going a bit out of fashion, or it can sometimes be seen as some really nasty undercurrents of IQ. When I say intelligence, I do not mean IQ tests or kind of like, you know, kind of, I mean the ability to interpret the world and kind of change things and come up with hypotheses and test them and come up with causal kind of views of the world. So key component of intelligence is understanding the why of why you do something rather than just the process. Like, it's really easy to, like, you see this in corporates all the time. Why do you do, like, it's a really good example of this around when the post office was negotiating with one of the unions about having 3 people in post office vans. And the union said, you've got to have 3 people in the van. It's health and safety. It's a health and safety thing. You've got to have 3 people in the van. And management had always taken this as read. And then one of their negotiators thought, I'm just going to go and find out the why. Like, it does say in the manual, you've got to have 3 people in the van because for safety reasons. I thought, let's not just take that as read. Let's go and look at the why you've got to have 3 people in the van. And it actually came from the 1940s when they had put this original thing together. And you needed 3 people for health and safety van. One person needed to drive the van. One person needed to deliver the parcels. And one person needed to look for the Luftwaffe to make sure that the bombs weren't being dropped. I said, well, do you know, maybe we don't need the third person anymore. Kind of so, but this is how, you need to look at the causal mechanism. So go to market, if you think about you look at the causal things around go to market, right? Look at what's the underlying reason for doing this sort of stuff? Because when you know the underlying reasons, then you know that your processes and systems and have to change on top as the underlying things change, or as the causal kind of chain moves. So, my view on hiring great leaders, you need to spend time talking to them. At the end of the day, it's fairly basic for anyone, right, in a go-to-market role, that they're going to be able to talk well. So you don't just want to do interviews. You want to try and do role plays. You want to get as many references as you can. You want to give them real life kind of problems. We always get people to put together a kind of presentation pack for us on, kind of what they would do in role or whatever it might look like. And that's at all levels of go-to-market. That's for your kind of your senior leaders. There's a lot, of course, and I know, again, it's not very fashionable and there are problems with this, I completely get, but some of this is gut feel. I think as you become more experienced as a leader and wiser as a leader, you get more of a feel for people, like in integrity, honesty. Like people can often think, like in sales roles, you want sort of bullshitters. And look, you need people who can present the truth in the best possible light. But, people who are just going to make shit up and if they're going to do that to customers, they're going to do it to you internally. And for both those reasons, it's a very short term. It might work for a couple of months, but it's going to cause you massive problems in any sort of sustainable business. So, that's me waffling a little bit, but there we go. Yeah.
This show is called Making the Grade. Graduation rates between funding rounds have unfortunately been falling a lot in recent years. It's become increasingly hard for companies that raise a Series A to get to B, etc. So I suppose wrapping up today's episode, we always like to zoom out and ask a few key questions around the startup ecosystem more broadly. Maybe the first one actually is, if you could change one thing about the startup, B2B tech startup ecosystem, what would it be and why?
Raising money is not an end, right? Kind of the end is growing the company, or the end is creating beautiful software, or the end is we don't want anyone in the corporate world to write a proposal without using AutogenAI. Those are ends. And then raising money is a way of delivering those ends. If I could change one thing, I would want to make it easier, quicker for companies to talk to funders. The founder, again, but I think this is magic wand and I think it's an impossible pipe dream. But whenever you're fundraising, it takes a massive amount of time. You have to do a lot of conversations. You have to answer questions. And that's, of course, reasonable and perfectly normal. And I think it's probably a necessary cost. So maybe you can't eliminate it. But I think good founders, or founders like me, we don't want to be spending time fundraising. We want to be spending time running our businesses. So anything we could, like our software tries to make the concertina, the public procurement process, anything which can concertina the dialogue process during funding rounds would be something which I think all of us would like, because the more time we can save on those things, the more time we can spend to get back to building the business.
Completely agree. It's such a drain, not just for founders, but actually for the broader senior leadership team. And obviously founders bear the brunt of that in terms of those conversations and, DD rooms and everything.
Yeah, I mean, very, very genuinely, we talk about when we're doing this, I try and keep the team as small as possible because, I'm like, well, product and building and sales team selling, don't really want them having to spend, 3 hours with 25 different investors going through the same slide deck, answering the same questions. We need to find a more efficient way of doing that.
And finally, Sean, if a founder listening today is thinking about their own exit strategy, whether that's in 12 months or maybe 5 years away, what's your biggest advice for founders looking to exit their business in 2025 and beyond, based on your experiences?
Think about what you want. Like in negotiation, the other side can't give you what you want unless you tell them what it is that you want. So at least they can do, but they'd have to do it accidentally. So you're better off just be really honest and telling the other side what you want. And I think for founders, again, it comes down to what would you do if you had infinite time and infinite money? You need to think about, what do you want from the exit? So if your genuine answer is, I don't want to work in this business anymore and I want £5 million, well, I want £5 million and I don't want to work in this business anymore. If you think, actually, this business is my baby and I really, really want to carry on working in it, but I'd quite like to pay off my mortgage, well, then the deal shape looks very different. And you're probably going to want to think about control. One of the reasons why you set up your business was so, probably you could do your own thing. Suddenly you've paid off your mortgage, but now you're a middle manager and you're finding you're spending your whole time in board meetings rather than with your staff. That's a different piece. So you really, you got to think about what it, like I always say, saying this is really hard. This is hard for all human beings, particularly human beings when they get a level of freedom. What is it you want? Particularly people who've been working 70 hours a week, right? Kind of building businesses. What is it you want next? And that is fundamentally, we're taught and we sort of build up in our minds. Well, I want an exit. I want to sell my company. I've been successful. I've done it. And my advice would be, by the way, it's perfectly fine ambition. If your ambition is sell it for $50 million and go and sit on an island and read books all day because you think you'd be good at that and you think you'd enjoy it and you think that'd be amazing, fantastic. That's what you want. Say that's what you want and put that in place. But if you suspect actually there are some other things you might want, again, just put them down. And like people always tell you, oh, you shouldn't say that to investors, or you shouldn't, just tell them what you want. They can't give you what you want unless you tell them what you want. Go.
Oh, Sean, thank you so much for coming on Making the Grade today. I feel like we could have talked for hours. You've taken us through, I think, just two incredible founder journeys, both quite different. Obviously, one that exited within 3 years, but one that I know now is going to be a lot longer than that and is probably going to be a generational business that puts a dent in there in the universe, as you quite rightly said. I think what's really stood out for me in this conversation is, I suppose, just your clarity of thought and your honesty around kind of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and being really true to yourself about what drives you. And of course, money is only going to get you so far. I love the fact that you had that exit, but you just jumped straight back in because that was your passion to keep building, to keep growing, and clearly to keep competing, because you seem like a very competitive guy, whether that's on the board games or in business. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners are going to have picked up a ton of value from your lessons, both at Corndell and now with Autogen. So as I said at the start, I'm definitely cheering you on from the sidelines and whatever comes next for AutogenAI.
I'd be delighted, Tom. Look, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to Making the Grade. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any questions following this episode, or you'd like to recommend a guest perhaps for our next season, please let us know at podcast@scalewise.com. And if you did enjoy today's episode, please do consider leaving us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'd really appreciate that. As this is a brand new show, reviews really help us spread the word and reach new listeners. Plus, we'd also love to hear what you're enjoying about our show. Thank you so much for your support, and see you soon for another episode of Making the Grade.